Let's start with a provocative question. Why does Africa disdain France? It's a question that might raise a few eyebrows, but it also uncovers a complex web of historical and contemporary issues. From strained diplomatic relations to conflicts of interest, there's a lot to unpack, and it's not just about past transgressions. The present-day interactions and the future outlook of this relationship are equally important. So why does this tension exist? What has caused this rift between Africa and France? Let's dive into the history and unravel the reasons behind this tumultuous relationship. The roots of this complex relationship can be traced back to the colonial era. Let's step back in time to the late 19th and early 20th centuries when much of Africa was under the dominion of European powers, France being one of the most influential. The French colonial empire in Africa was vast, stretching from the arid landscapes of North Africa to the lush rainforests of West Africa. This was a time of profound transformation, where African societies were uprooted from their traditional ways of life and forced to adapt to the demands of their new French rulers. The French implemented a system known as direct rule. This meant that they controlled every aspect of governance, from the highest levels of administration down to the local village. French was imposed as the official language, and African cultures were often suppressed in favor of French customs and traditions. But this control came at a steep cost for African societies. Economic exploitation was rampant, with resources being extracted and shipped back to France, leaving the colonies impoverished. In addition, many Africans were subjected to harsh labor conditions, forced to work on plantations and in mines for the benefit of their colonial masters. The injustices of this era did not go unnoticed. Resistance movements sprouted across the continent, fighting against the oppression and exploitation. These movements laid the groundwork for the struggle for independence that would sweep across Africa in the mid-20th century. However, the end of colonial rule did not mean the end of French influence in Africa. In fact, in many ways it continued and even intensified. France maintained significant economic and political ties with its former colonies, a relationship that many Africans felt was neo-colonialism in disguise.
They also said your language of instruction shall be French, whether you like it or not. That France will have military presence in your country, that your military can only be trained by France, that you can only buy military equipment from France, that you cannot have any military alliance with your neighbor, and that in the event of war, your allegiance is only to France. And furthermore, because they have military presence in your country, they can invade you without notice should they feel that the interests of France in your country are being violated.
Teach, sister, teach. Speak on, sister.
Nothing has changed. The same people who have the audacity to tell us that we are poor countries, they are taking trillions out of Africa every year.
And even today, the legacy of French colonialism continues to shape the relationship between France and Africa. The tensions that exist are not just remnants of the past, but are constantly being revived and reinterpreted in the present. The scars of colonialism evidently still run deep. Fast forward to the present day, and the relationship between France and Africa has further soured. A new era of diplomacy has dawned, and France finds itself in a precarious position. Its foreign policy, once a beacon of influence, now appears weak and unappealing to many African nations. Criticisms abound, from the lack of genuine change to superficial declarations that do little to address the deep-seated issues at hand. France's influence in Africa, particularly in regions like West and North Africa, has been strained. The balance of power has undeniably shifted, and new players have entered the scene. China and Russia have made significant strides in Africa, offering better deals and building stronger relationships with African nations. The French, in contrast, seem to be grappling with uncertainty in their own identity, particularly in the face of a progressive left that champions a shift from France's colonial past. This shift in power is not just a matter of economics or politics, it's a reflection of the changing dynamics of the world. The once powerful West is weakening on the international stage, and the rise of new global powers is reshaping the landscape of international relations. Africa is no longer a passive player but an active participant, choosing alliances that serve its interests best. In this new world order, France's ability to reset relations with countries like Algeria depends heavily on what it can deliver. It's no longer enough to rely on historical ties or past influence. It's about strategic foreign policy, meaningful change, and genuine engagement. The key issue in France's relations with Italy on Libya, for instance, is access to energy. It's a tangible, pressing concern that highlights the need for a more comprehensive approach to foreign policy. Yet amidst all these changes, one thing remains clear. France's colonial past continues to cast a long shadow over its present-day relations with Africa. The anti-colonial sentiment is not just a historical grievance, but a present-day reality that France must navigate. France's waning influence and the rise of new global powers have added another layer of complexity to this relationship. As we move forward, it's clear that the rules of diplomacy are changing, and France must adapt if it wishes to maintain its influence in Africa. Anti-colonial sentiment is a major driver of the distrust and resentment towards France. It's a sentiment that echoes through the collective memory of the African continent, a reminder of a past marred by subjugation and exploitation. France's colonial past is a ghost that continues to haunt its relations with Africa. Many African nations still bear the scars of this period, a time when their resources were plundered, their people exploited, and their cultures suppressed.
It's unfair to say, but I'll say it. For France, the chicken are coming home to roost. They are now being reminded of what they did to Guinea in 1958. They are being reminded of what they did to Algeria. They are being reminded of what they did in Indonesia and other parts of the world. I hope that this very painful lesson is going to send a clear message to the French administration that the time is now to accept and acknowledge that the injustices that are inbuilt in the French system will be dealt with, and dealt with satisfactorily with people participation.
The echoes of this past reverberate through the present, fueling a sense of resentment and distrust towards their former colonizers. This sentiment is further amplified by the weakening of the West on the international stage. As the balance of power shifts, with countries like China and Russia making significant strides in Africa, France's influence appears to wane. This power dynamic, coupled with France's colonial past, creates a potent mix of anti-colonial sentiment, one that France is struggling to navigate. At the heart of this struggle is French President Emmanuel Macron. His attempts to reset relations with Africa have been met with skepticism. The pressure on him is immense. It's not just about making superficial declarations or empty gestures, it's about making genuine changes that can address the deep-seated issues that stem from France's colonial past. But can Macron deliver? Can he navigate the complexities of this relationship, a relationship that is steeped in history and fraught with tension? Can he make the necessary changes to reset France's relations with Africa and quell the anti-colonial sentiment? These are difficult questions, ones that don't have easy answers. They require a comprehensive strategic foreign policy, one that acknowledges the past, addresses the present, and looks towards the future. They require a policy that doesn't just seek to appease, but to genuinely engage and understand. The question remains, can France reverse the tide and reset its relations with Africa? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the anti-colonial sentiment is a force to be reckoned with, a force that is shaping the future of Africa's relations with France. The relationship between Africa and France is a complex one, rooted in a painful history and strained by contemporary geopolitics. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've uncovered today. We started our journey by exploring the historical background, delving deep into the past where France, like many other colonial powers, left a lasting imprint on Africa. This, as we learned, set the stage for a relationship burdened by historical injustices and unequal power dynamics. Fast forward to the present day, we examined the current state of diplomacy between Africa and France. We saw how French President Emmanuel Macron's attempts to reset relations with Algeria have not only strained his relationship with Morocco but also highlighted a broader issue, the perceived weakness of French foreign policy in Africa. With China and Russia offering better deals and making significant strides in Africa, France's influence appears to be waning. Then, we delved into the anti-colonial sentiment that is prevalent in Africa today. This sentiment, fueled by France's colonial past and the weakening of the West on the international stage, has led to a growing resentment towards France. It's become clear that superficial declarations from France are not enough. What's needed is a genuine change in policy and practice. But what does all this mean? Well, the key takeaway here is that the relationship between Africa and France is a delicate one, fraught with complexities and challenges. It's a relationship that's deeply rooted in history, influenced by contemporary geopolitics, and shaped by a shared, albeit painful, past. And so we find ourselves at a crossroads. Can President Macron deliver the comprehensive strategic foreign policy needed to reset relations with Algeria, and by extension Africa? Can France come to terms with its colonial past and take the necessary steps to heal old wounds? These are questions that only time can answer. Only time will tell if the relationship between Africa and France can be healed. Until then, the question remains, why does Africa hate France?